Section 21 of The Call of the Canyon by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 11, Part 2. Carley directed stumbling steps toward the light of her tent. Her eyes had not been used to such black shadow along the ground. She had, too, squeamish feminine fears of hydrophobia skunks and nameless animals or reptiles that were imagined denizens of the darkness. She gained her tent and entered. The Mexican Gino, as he called himself, had lighted her lamp and fire. Carley was chilled through, and the tent felt so warm and cozy that she could scarcely believe it. She fastened the screen door, laced the flaps across it, except at the top, and then gave herself up to the lulling and comforting heat. There were plans to perfect, innumerable things to remember, a car and accessories, horses, saddles, outfits to buy. Carley knew that she should sit down at her table and write and figure, but she could not do it then. For a long time she sat over the little stove, toasting her knees and hands, adding some chips now and then to the red coals, and her mind seemed a kaleidoscope of changing visions, thoughts, feelings. At last she undressed and blew out the lamp and went to bed. Instantly a thick blackness seemed to enfold her, and silence as of a dead world settled down upon her. Drowsy as she was, she could not close her eyes nor refrain from listening. Darkness and silence were tangible things. She felt them, and they seemed suddenly potent with magic charm to still the tumult of her, to soothe and rest, and to create thoughts she had never thought before. Rest was more than selfish indulgence. Loneliness was necessary to gain consciousness of the soul. Already far back in the past seemed Carley's other life. By and by, the dead stillness awoke to faint sounds not before perceptible to her. A low, mournful sough of the wind in the cedars. Then the faint, far distant note of a coyote, sad as the night and infinitely wild. Days passed. Carley worked in the mornings with her hands and her brains. In the afternoons she rode and walked and climbed with the double object, to work herself into fit physical condition and to explore every nook and corner of her 640 acres. Then what she had expected and deliberately induced by her efforts quickly came to pass. Just as the year before she had suffered excruciating pain from aching muscles and saddle blisters and walking blisters and a very rending of her bones, so now she fell victim to them again. In sunshine and rain she faced the desert. Sunburn and sting of sleet were equally to be endured. But that abomination, the hateful blinding sandstorm, did not daunt her. But the weary hours of abnegation to this physical torture at least held one consoling recompense as she compared with her experiences of last year. It was that there was no one interested to watch her weakness and failures and blunders. She could fight it out alone. 3 weeks of this self-imposed strenuous training wore by before Carley was free enough from weariness and pain to experience other sensations. Her general health evidently had not been so good as when she had first visited Arizona. She caught cold and suffered other ills attendant upon an abrupt change of climate and condition. But doggedly she kept at her task. She rode when she should have been in bed. She walked when she should have ridden. She climbed when she should have kept to level ground. And finally, by degrees so gradual as not to be noticed except in the sum of them, she began to mend. Meanwhile, the construction of her house went on with uninterrupted rapidity. When the low slanting, wide-eaved roof was completed, Carley lost further concern about rainstorms. Let them come. When the plumbing was all in, and Carley saw a verification of Hoyle's assurance that it would mean a gravity supply of water ample and continual, she lost her last concern as to the practicability of the work. That and the earnings of her endurance seemed to bring closer a wonderful reward, still nameless and spiritual, that had been unattainable, but now breathed to her on the fragrant desert wind and in the brooding silence. The time came when each afternoon's ride or climb called to Carley with increasing delight. But the fact that she must soon reveal to Glen her presence and transformation did not seem to be all the cause. She could ride without pain, walk without losing her breath, work without blistering her hands. And in this there was compensation. The building of the house that was to become a home, the development of water resources and land that meant the making of a ranch, these did not altogether constitute the anticipation of content. To be active, to accomplish things, to recall to mind her knowledge of manual training, of domestic science, of designing and painting, to learn to cook, these were indeed measures full of reward. But they were not all. In her wondering, pondering meditation, she arrived at the point where she tried to assign to her love the growing fullness of her life. This, too, splendid and all-pervading as it was, she had to reject. Some exceedingly elusive and vital significance of life had insidiously come to Carley. One afternoon, with a sky full of white and black rolling clouds, and a cold wind sweeping through the cedars, she halted to rest and escape the chilling gale for a while. In a sunny place, under the lee of a gravel bank, she sought refuge. It was warm here because of the reflected sunlight and the absence of wind. The sand at the bottom of the bank held a heat that felt good to her cold hands. All about her and over her swept the keen wind, rustling the sage, seeping the sand, swishing the cedars, but she was out of it, protected and insulated. The sky above showed blue between the threatening clouds. There were no birds or living creatures in sight. Certainly the place had little of color or beauty or grace, nor could she see beyond a few rods. Lying there, without any particular reason that she was conscious of, she suddenly felt shot through and through with exhilaration. Another day, the warmest of the spring so far, she rode a Navajo mustang she had recently bought from a passing trader, and at the farthest end of her section, in rough wooded and ridged ground she had not explored, she found a canyon with red walls and pine trees and gleaming streamlet, and glades of grass and jumbles of rocks. It was a miniature canyon, to be sure, only a quarter of a mile long and as deep as the height of a lofty pine, and so narrow that it seemed only the width of a lane. But it had all the features of Oak Creek Canyon, and so sufficed for the exultant joy of possession. She explored it. The willow brakes and oak thickets harbored rabbits and birds. She saw the white flags of deer running away down the open. Up at the head, where the canyon boxed, she flushed a flock of wild turkeys. They ran like ostriches and flew like great brown chickens. In a cavern, Carley found the den of a bear, and in another place the bleached bones of a steer. She lingered here in the shaded depths with a feeling as if she were indeed lost to the world. These big brown and seamy barked pines, with their spreading gnarled arms and webs of green needles, belonged to her, as also the tiny brook, the bluebell smiling out of the ferns, the single stalk of mescal on a rocky ledge. Never had sun and earth, tree and rock, seemed a part of her being until then. She would become a sun worshipper and a lover of the earth. That canyon had opened there to sky and light for millions of years, and doubtless it had harbored sheep herders, Indians, cliff dwellers, barbarians. She was a woman with white skin and a cultivated mind, but the affinity for them existed in her. She felt it, and that an understanding of it would be good for body and soul. Another day she found a little grove of jack pines growing on a flat mesa-like bluff, the highest point on her land. The trees were small and close together. mingling their green needles overhead with their discarded brown ones on the ground. From here Carley could see afar to all points of the compass, the slow green descent to the south, and a climb to the black timbered distance, the ridged and canyoned country to the west, red vents choked with green and rimmed with gray. To the north, the grand upflung mountain kingdom crowned with snow, and to the east, the vastness of illimitable space, the openness and wildness, the chaste and beaten mosaic of colored sands and rocks. Again and again she visited this lookout and came to love its isolation, its command of wondrous prospects, its power of suggestion to her thoughts. She became a creative being in harmony with the live things around her. The great life-dispensing sun poured its rays down upon her as if to ripen her, and the earth seemed warm, motherly, immense with its all-embracing arms. She no longer plucked the bluebells to press to her face, but leaned to them. Every blade of grama grass, with its shining bronze-tufted seed head, had significance to her. The scents of the desert began to have meanings for her. She sensed within her the working of a great leveling process through which supreme happiness would come. June. The rich, thick amber light, like a transparent reflection from some intense golden medium, seemed to float in the warm air. The sky became an azure blue. In the still noontides, when the bees hummed drowsily and the flies buzzed, vast creamy white columnar clouds rolled up from the horizon, like colossal ships with bulging sails. And summer, with its rush of growing things, was at hand. Carley rode afar, seeking in strange places the secret that eluded her. Only a few days now until she would ride down to Oak Creek Canyon. There was a low, singing melody of wind in the cedars. The earth became too beautiful in her magnified sight. A great truth was dawning upon her, that the sacrifice of what she had held as necessary to the enjoyment of life, the strain of conflict, the labor of hands, the forcing of weary body, the enduring of pain, the contact with the earth, had served somehow to rejuvenate her blood, quicken her pulse, intensify her sensorial faculties, thrill her very soul, lead her into the realm of enchantment. One afternoon, a dull, lead black-colored cinder knoll tempted her to explore its bare heights. She rode up until her mustang sank to his knees and could climb no farther. From there she essayed the ascent on foot. It took labor, but at last she gained the summit, burning, sweating, panting. The cinder hill was an extinct crater of a volcano. In the center of it lay a deep bowl, wondrously symmetrical, and of a dark, lusterless hue. Not a blade of grass was there, nor a plant. Carley conceived a desire to go to the bottom of this pit. She tried the cinders at the edge of the slope. They had the same consistency as those of the ascent she had overcome. But here there was a steeper incline. A tingling rush of daring seemed to drive her over the rounded rim, and once started down, it was as if she wore 7-league boots. Fear left her. Only an exhilarating emotion consumed her. If there were danger, it mattered not. She strode down with giant steps. She plunged. She started avalanches to ride them until they stopped. She leaped, and lastly, she fell to roll over the cinders to the pit. There she lay. It seemed a comfortable resting place. The pit was scarcely 6 feet across. She gazed upward and was astounded. How steep was the rounded slope on all sides! There were no sides. It was a circle. She looked up at a round lake of deep translucent sky. Such depth of blue! Such exquisite rare color! Carley imagined she could gaze through it to the infinite beyond. She closed her eyes and rested. Soon the laboring of her heart and breath calmed to normal so that she could not hear them. Then she lay perfectly motionless. With eyes shut, she seemed still to look, and what she saw was the sunlight through the blood and flesh of her eyelids. It was red, as rare a hue as the blue sky. So piercing did it grow that she had to shade her eyes with her arm. Again the strange, rapt glow suffused her body. Never in all her life had she been so absolutely alone. She might as well have been in her grave. She might have been dead to all earthly things and reveling in spirit in the glory of the physical that had escaped her in life. And she had abandoned herself to this influence. She loved these dry, dusty cinders. She loved the crater here hidden from all save birds. She loved the desert, the earth, above all the sun. She was a product of the earth, a creation of the sun. She had been an infinitesimal atom of inert something that had quickened to life under the blazing magic of the sun. Soon her spirit would abandon her body and go on, while her flesh and bone returned to dust. This frame of hers that carried the divine spark belonged to the earth. She had only been ignorant, mindless, feelingless, absorbed in the seeking of gain, blind to the truth. She was to give. She had been created a woman. She belonged to nature. She was nothing save a mother of the future. She had loved neither Glen Kilbourne nor life itself. False education, false standards, false environment had developed her into a woman who imagined that she must feed her body on the milk and honey of indulgence. She was abased now. Woman is animal, though saved and uplifted by her power of immortality. Transcendental was her female power to link life with the future. The power of the plant seed, the power of the earth, the heat of the sun, the inscrutable creation spirit of nature, almost the divinity of God. These were all hers because she was a woman. That was the great secret, aloof so long. That was what had been wrong with life, the woman blind to her meaning, her power, her mastery. So she abandoned herself to the woman within her. She held out her arms to the blue abyss of heavens as if to embrace the universe. She was nature. She kissed the dusty cinders and pressed her breast against the warm slope. Her heart swelled to bursting with a glorious and unutterable happiness. That afternoon, as the sun was setting under a gold-white scroll of cloud, Carley got back to Deep Lake. A familiar lounging figure crossed her sight. It approached to where she had dismounted. Charley, the sheep herder of Oak Creek. "Howdy," he drawled with his queer smile. "So it was you all who had this Deep Lake section?" "Yes, and how are you, Charley?" she replied, shaking hands with him. "Me? Oh, I'm tip-top. I'm sure glad you got this ranch. Reckon I'll hit you for a job." "I'd give it to you, but aren't you working for the Hutters?" "Nope, not any more. Me and Stanton had a row with them." How droll and dry he was. His lean, olive-brown face, with its guileless, clear eyes, and his lanky figure in blue jeans, vividly recalled Oak Creek to Carley. "Oh, I'm sorry," returned she haltingly, somehow checked in her warm rush of thought. "Stanton, did he quit too?" "Yup, he sure did." "What was the trouble?" "Reckon because Flo made up to Kilbourne," replied Charley with a grin. "Ah, I see," murmured Carley. A blankness seemed to wave over her. It extended to the air without, to the sense of the golden sunset. It passed. What should she ask? What of a thousand sudden flashing questions? Are the Hutters back?" "Sure, been back several days. I reckon Hoyle told you. Maybe he didn't know, though, for nobody's been to town." "How is he? How are they all?" faltered Carley. There was a strange wall here between her thought and her utterance. "Everybody's satisfied, I reckon," replied Charley. "Flo, how is she?" burst out Carley. "Ah, Flo's loony over her husband," drawled Charley, his clear eyes on Carley's. "Husband?" she gasped. "Sure. Flo's gone and went and done what I swore on." "Who?" whispered Carley, and the query was a terrible blade piercing her heart. "Now who'd you reckon on?" asked Charley with a slow grin. Carley's lips were mute. "Well, it was your old beau. "That you wouldn't have," returned Charley, as he gathered up his long frame, evidently to leave. "Kilbourne. He and Flo came back from the Tonto all hitched up." End of chapter 11, part 2. Section 22 of The Call of the Canyon by Zane Grey. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 12. Vague sense of movement, of darkness, and of cold attended Carley's consciousness for what seemed endless time. A fall over rocks and a severe thrust from a sharp branch brought an acute appreciation of her position, if not of her mental state. Night had fallen, the stars were out. She had stumbled over a low ledge. Evidently she had wandered around dazedly and aimlessly until brought to her senses by pain. But for a gleam of campfires through the cedars, she would have been lost. It did not matter. She was lost anyhow. What was it that had happened? Charley, the sheepherder. Then the thunderbolt of his words burst upon her. She collapsed to the cold stones. She lay quivering from head to toe. She dug her fingers into the moss and lichen. "Oh, God, to think, after all, it happened," she moaned. There had been a rending within her breast, as of physical violence, from which she now suffered anguish. There were 1,000 stinging nerves. There was a mortal sickness of horror, of insupportable, heartbreaking loss. She could not endure it. She could not live under it. She lay there until energy supplanted shock. Then she rose to rush into the darkest shadows of the cedars, to grope here and there, hanging her head, wringing her hands, beating her breast. "It can't be true," she cried. "Not after my struggle, my victory. Not now." But there had been no victory, and now it was too late. She was betrayed, ruined, lost. That wonderful love had wrought transformation in her, and now havoc. Once she fell against the branches of a thick cedar that upheld her. The fragrance which had been sweet was now bitter. Life that had been bliss was now hateful. She could not keep still for a single moment. Black night, cedars, brush, rocks, washes seemed not to obstruct her. In a frenzy she rushed on, tearing her dress, her hands, her hair. Violence of some kind was imperative. All at once a pale gleaming open space, shimmering under the stars, lay before her. It was water, deep lake, and instantly a hideous, terrible longing to destroy herself obsessed her. She had no fear. She could have welcomed the cold, slimy depths that meant oblivion. But could they really bring oblivion? A year ago she would have believed so, and would no longer have endured such agony. She had changed. A cursed strength had come to her, and it was this strength that now augmented her torture. She flung wide her arms to the pitiless white stars and looked up at them. "My hope, my faith, my love have failed me," she whispered. "They have been a lie. I went through hell for them, and now I've nothing to live for. Oh, let me end it all." If she prayed to the stars for mercy, it was denied her. Passionlessly they blazed on, but she could not kill herself. In that hour death would have been the only relief and peace left to her. Stricken by the cruelty of her fate, she fell back against the stones and gave up to grief. Nothing was left but fierce pain. The youth and vitality and intensity of her then locked arms with anguish and torment and a cheated, unsatisfied love. Strength of mind and body involuntarily resisted the ravages of this catastrophe. Willpower seemed nothing, but the flesh of her, that medium of exquisite sensation, so full of life, so prone to joy, refused to surrender. The part of her that fought terribly for its heritage. All night long Carley lay there. The crescent moon went down. The stars moved on their course. The coyotes ceased to wail. The wind died away. The lapping of the waves along the lake shore wore to gentle splash. The whispering of the insects stopped as the cold of dawn approached. The darkest hour fell, hour of silence, solitude, and melancholy, when the desert lay tranced, cold, waiting, mournful, without light of moon or stars or sun. In the gray dawn Carley dragged her bruised and aching body back to her tent, and, fastening the door, she threw off wet clothes and boots and fell upon her bed. Slumber of exhaustion came to her. When she awoke, the tent was light, and the moving shadows of cedar boughs on the white canvas told her that the sun was straight above. Carley ached as never before. A deep pang seemed invested in every bone. Her heart felt swollen out of proportion to its space in her breast. Her breathing came slow and it hurt. Her blood was sluggish. Suddenly she shut her eyes. She loathed the light of day. What was it that had happened? Then the brutal truth flashed over her again, in aspect now, with all the old bitterness. For an instant she experienced a suffocating sensation, as if the canvas had sagged under the burden of heavy air and was crushing her breast and heart. Then wave after wave of emotion swept over her. The storm winds of grief and passion were loosened again, and she writhed in her misery. Someone knocked on her door. The Mexican woman called anxiously. Carley awoke to the fact that her presence was not solitary on the physical earth, even if her soul seemed stricken to eternal loneliness. Even in the desert there was a world to consider. Vanity had bled to death. Pride that had been crushed availed her not here. But something else came to her support. The lesson of the West had been to endure, not to shirk, to face an issue, not to hide. Carley got up, bathed, dressed, brushed, and arranged her disheveled hair. The face she saw in the mirror excited her, amaze and pity. Then she went out in answer to the call for dinner. But she could not eat. The ordinary functions of life appeared to be deadened. The day happened to be Sunday, and therefore the workmen were absent. Carley had the place to herself. How the half-completed house mocked her! She could not bear to look at it. What use could she make of it now? Flo Hutter had become the working comrade of Glen Kilbourne, the mistress of his cabin. She was his wife, and she would be the mother of his children. That thought gave birth to the darkest hour of Carley Burch's life. She became possessed as by 1,000 devils. She became merely a female robbed of her mate. Reason was not in her, nor charity, nor justice. All that was abnormal in human nature seemed coalesced in her, dominant, passionate, savage, terrible. She hated with an incredible and insane ferocity. In the seclusion of her tent, crouched on her bed, silent, locked, motionless, she yet was the embodiment of all terrible strife and storm in nature. Her heart was a maelstrom, and would have whirled and sucked down to hell all the beings that were men. Her soul was a bottomless gulf, filled with the gales and fires of jealousy, superhuman to destroy. That fury consumed all her remaining strength, and from the relapse she sank to sleep. Morning brought the inevitable reaction. However long her other struggles, this monumental and final one would be brief. She realized that, yet was unable to understand how it could be possible, unless shock or death or mental aberration ended the fight. An eternity of emotion lay back between this awakening of intelligence and the hour of her fall into the clutches of primitive passion. That morning she faced herself in the mirror and asked, "Now, what do I owe you?" It was not her voice that answered. It was beyond her. But it said, "Go on. You are cut adrift. You are alone. You owe none but yourself. Go on, not backward, not to the depths, but up, upward." She shuddered at such a decree. How impossible for her! All animal, all woman, all emotion, how could she live on the cold, pure heights? Yet She owed something intangible and inscrutable to herself. Was it the thing that woman lacked physically, yet contained hidden in her soul, an element of eternal spirit to rise? Because of heartbreak and ruin and irreparable loss must she fall? Was loss of love and husband and children only a test? That present hour would be swallowed in the sum of life's trials. She could not go back. She would not go down. There was wrenched from her tired and sore heart an unalterable and unquenchable decision to make her own soul prove the evolution of woman. Vessel of blood and flesh she might be, doomed by nature to the reproduction of her kind, but she had in her the supreme spirit and power to carry on the progress of the ages, the climb of woman out of the darkness. Carley went out to the workmen. The house would be completed and she would live in it. Always there was the stretching and illimitable desert to look at and the grand heave upward of the mountains. Hoyle was full of zest for the practical details of the building. He saw nothing of the havoc wrought in her, nor did the other workmen glance more than casually at her. In this, Carley lost something of his shirking fear that her loss and grief were patent to all eyes. That afternoon, she mounted the most spirited of the mustangs she had purchased from the Indians. To govern him and stick on him required all her energy, and she rode him hard and far out across the desert, across mile after mile of cedar forest, clear to the foothills. She rested there, absorbed in gazing desertward, and upon turning back again, she ran him over the level stretches. Wind and branch threshed her seemingly to ribbons. Violence seemed good for her. The fall had no fear for her now. She reached camp at dusk, hot as fire, breathless and strengthless. But she had earned something. Such action required constant use of muscle and mind. If need be, she could drive both to the very furthermost limit. She could ride and ride until the future, like the immensity of the desert there, might swallow her. She changed her clothes and rested a while. The call to supper found her hungry. In this fact she discovered mockery of her grief. Love was not the food of life. Exhausted nature's need of rest and sleep was no respecter of a woman's emotion. Next day Carley rode northward, wildly and fearlessly, as if this conscious activity was the initiative of endless number of rides that were to save her. As before, the foothills called her, and she went on until she came to a very high one. Carley dismounted from her panting horse, answering the familiar impulse to attain heights by her own effort. Am I only a weakling, she asked herself, only a creature mined by the fever of the soul, thrown from one emotion to another, never the same, yearning, suffering, sacrificing, hoping and changing, forever the same? What is it that drives me? A great city with all its attractions has failed to help me realize my life. So have friends failed. So has the world. What can solitude and grandeur do? All this obsession of mine, all this strange feeling for simple, elemental, earthly things likewise will fail me. Yet I am driven. They would call me a madwoman. It took Carley a full hour of slow body bending labor to climb to the summit of that hill. High, steep, and rugged, it resisted ascension. But at last she surmounted it and sat alone on the heights, with naked eyes and an unconscious prayer on her lips. What was it that had happened? Could there be here a different answer from that which always mocked her? She had been a girl, not accountable for loss of mother, for choice of home and education. She belonged to a class. She had grown to womanhood in it. She had loved, and in loving had escaped the evil of her day, if not its taint. She had lived only for herself. Conscience had awakened, but alas, too late. She had overthrown the sordid, self-seeking habit of life. She had awakened to real womanhood. She had fought the insidious spell of modernity, and she had defeated it. She had learned the thrill of making root in new soil, the pain and joy of labor, the bliss of solitude, the promise of home and love and motherhood. But she had gathered all these marvelous things to her soul too late for happiness. "Now it is answered," she declared aloud. "That is what has happened, and all that is past. Is there anything left? If so, what?" She flung her query out to the winds of the desert, but the desert seemed too gray, too vast, too remote, too aloof, too measureless. It was not concerned with her little life. Then she turned to the mountain kingdom. It seemed overpoweringly near at hand. It loomed above her to pierce the fleecy clouds. It was only a stupendous upheaval of earth crust, grown over at the base by leagues and leagues of pine forests, belted along the middle by vast slanting, zigzag slopes of aspen, rent and riven toward the heights into canyon and gorge, bared above to cliffs and corners of craggy rock, whitened at the sky-piercing peaks by snow. Its beauty and sublimity were lost upon Carley now. She was concerned with its travail, its age, its endurance, its strength. And she studied it with magnified sight. What incomprehensible subterranean force had swelled those immense slopes and lifted the huge bulk aloft to the clouds? Cataclysm of nature, the expanding or shrinking of the earth, vast volcanic action under the surface? Whatever it had been, it had left its expression of the travail of the universe. The mountain mass had been hot gas when flung from the parent sun, and now it was solid granite. What had it endured in the making? What indeed had been its dimensions before the millions of years of its struggle? Eruption, earthquake, avalanche, the attrition of glacier, the erosion of water, the cracking of frost, the weathering of rain and wind and snow. These it had eternally fought and resisted in vain. Yet it still stood magnificent, frowning, battle-scarred, and undefeated. Its sky-piercing peaks were as cries for mercy to the infinite. This old mountain realized its doom. It had to go, perhaps to make room for a newer and better kingdom. But it endured because of the spirit of nature. The great notched circular line of rocks below and between the peaks, in the body of the mountains, showed where in ages past the heart of living granite had been blown out, to let loose on all the near surrounding desert the streams of black lava and the hills of black cinders. Despite its fringe of green, it was hoary with age. Each looming gray-faced wall, massive and sublime, seemed a monument of its mastery over time. Every deep-cut canyon, showing the skeleton ribs, the caverns and caves, its avalanche-carved sides, its long fan-shaped, spreading taluses, carried conviction to the spectator that it was but a frail bit of rock, that its life was little and brief, that upon it had been laid the merciless curse of nature. Change must unknit the very knots of the center of the earth. So its strength lay in the sublimity of its defiance. It meant to endure to the last rolling grain of sand. It was a dead mountain of rock without spirit, yet it taught a grand lesson to the seeing eye. Life was only a part, perhaps an infinitely small part, of nature's plan. Death and decay were just as important to her inscrutable design. The universe had not been created for life, ease, pleasure, and happiness of a man-creature developed from lower organisms. If nature's secret was the developing of a spirit through all time, Carley divined that she had it within her. So the present meant little. "I have no right to be unhappy," concluded Carley. "I have no right to Glen Kilbourne. I failed him. In that I failed myself. Neither life nor nature failed me, nor love. It is no longer a mystery. Unhappiness is only a change. Happiness itself is only a change. So what does it matter? The great thing is to see life, to understand, to feel, to work, to fight, to endure. It is not my fault I am here, but it is my fault if I leave this strange old earth the poorer for my failure. I will no longer be little. I will find strength. I will endure. I still have eyes, ears, nose, taste. I can feel the sun, the wind, the nip of frost. Must I slink like a cavern because I've lost the love of one man? Must I hate Flo Hutter because she will make Glen happy? Never. All of this seems better so, because through it I am changed. I might have lived on, a selfish clod. Carley turned from the mountain kingdom and faced her future with the profound and sad and far-seeing look that had come with her lesson. She knew what to give. Sometime and somewhere there would be recompense. She would hide her wound in the faith that time would heal it. And the ordeal she set herself to prove her sincerity and strength was to ride down to Oak Creek Canyon. Carley did not wait many days. Strange how the old vanity held her back until something of the havoc in her face should have gone. One morning she set out early, riding her best horse, and she took a sheep trail across country. The distance by road was much farther. The June morning was cool, sparkling, fragrant. Mockingbirds sang from the topmost twigs of cedars. Doves cooed in the pines. Sparrowhawks sailed low over the open grassy patches. Desert primrose showed their round pink clusters in sunny places, and here and there burned the carmine of Indian paintbrush. Jackrabbits and cottontails bounded and scampered away through the sage. The desert had life and color and movement this June day, and as always, there was a dry fragrance on the air. Her mustang had been inured to long and consistent travel over the desert. Her weight was nothing to him, and he kept to the swinging lope for miles. As she approached Oak Creek Canyon, however, she drew him to a trot, and then a walk. Sight of the deep red-walled and green-floored canyon was a shock to her. The trail came out on the road that led to Ryan's sheep camp, at a point several miles west of the cabin where Carley had encountered Hayes Ruff. She remembered the curves and stretches, and especially the steep jump-off where the road led down off the rim into the canyon. Here she dismounted and walked. From the foot of this descent she knew every rod of the way would be familiar to her, and womanlike she wanted to turn away and fly from them. But she kept on and mounted again at level ground. The murmur of the creek suddenly assailed her ears, sweet, sad, memorable, strangely powerful to hurt. Yet the sound seemed of long ago. Down here summer had advanced. Rich, thick foliage overspread the winding road of sand. Then out of the shade she passed into the sunnier regions of isolated pines. Along here she had raced Calico with Glen's bay, and here she had caught him, and there was the place she had fallen. She halted a moment under the pine tree where Glen had held her in his arms. Tears dimmed her eyes. If only she had known then the truth, the reality, but regrets were useless. By and by craggy red walls loomed above the trees, and its pipe organ conformation was familiar to Carley. She left the road and turned to go down to the creek. Sycamores and maples and great boulders and mossy ledges overhanging the water and a huge sentinel pine marked the spot where she and Glen had eaten their lunch that last day. Her mustang splashed into the clear water and halted to drink. Beyond, through the trees, Carley saw the sunny red earthed clearing that was Glen's farm. She looked and fought herself and bit her quivering lip until she tasted blood. Then she rode out into the open. The whole west side of the canyon had been cleared and cultivated and plowed, but she gazed no further. She did not want to see the spot where she had given Glen his ring and had parted from him. She rode on. If she could pass West Fork, she believed her courage would rise to the completion of this ordeal. Places were what she feared, places that she had loved while blindly believing she hated. There, the narrow gap of green and blue split the looming red wall. She was looking into West Fork. Up there stood the cabin. How fierce a pang rent her breast! She faltered at the crossing of the branched stream, and almost surrendered. The water murmured, the leaves rustled, the bees hummed, the birds sang, all with some sad sweetness that seemed of the past. Then the trail leading up West Fork was like a barrier. She saw 2 horse tracks in it. Next, she descried boot tracks, the shape of which was so well remembered that it shook her heart. There were fresh tracks in the sand, pointing in the direction of the lodge. Ah, that was where Glen lived now. Carley strained at her will to keep it fighting her memory. The glory and the dream were gone. A touch of spur urged her mustang into a gallop. The splashing ford of the creek, the still eddying pool beyond, the green orchards, the white lacy waterfall, and Lolomi Lodge. Nothing had altered, but Carley seemed returning after many years. Slowly she dismounted. Slowly she climbed the porch steps. Was there no one at home? Yet the vacant doorway, the silence, something attested to the knowledge of Carley's presence. Then suddenly Mrs. Hutter fluttered out with Flo behind her. "You dear girl, I'm so glad," cried Mrs. Hutter, her voice trembling. "I'm glad to see you, too," said Carley, bending to receive Mrs. Hutter's embrace. Carley saw dim eyes, the stress of agitation, but no surprise. "Oh, Carley!" burst out the Western girl, with a voice rich and full, yet tremulous. "Flo, I've come to wish you happiness," replied Carley very low. Was it the same Flo? This seemed more of a woman, strange now, white and strained, beautiful, eager, questioning. A cry of gladness burst from her. Carley felt herself enveloped in strong, close clasp, and then a warm, quick kiss of joy. It shocked her, yet somehow thrilled. Sure was the welcome here. Sure was the strange situation also. But the voice rang too glad a note for Carley. It touched her deeply, yet she could not understand. She had not measured the depth of Western friendship. "Have you seen Glen?" queried Flo breathlessly. "Oh, no, indeed not," replied Carley, slowly gaining composure. The nervous agitation of these women had stilled her own. "I just rode up the trail. Where is he?" "He was here a moment ago," panted Flo. "Oh, Carley, we sure are locoed. Why, we only heard an hour ago that you were at Deep Lake. Charley rode in. He told us. I thought my heart would break. Poor Glen, when he heard it. But never mind me. Jump your horse and run to West Fork." The spirit of her was like the strength of her arms as she hurried Carley across the porch and shoved her down the steps. "Climb on and run, Carley," cried Flo. "If you only knew how glad he'll be that you came." Carley leaped into the saddle and wheeled the mustang. But she had no answer for the girl's singular, almost wild exultance. Then, like a shot, the spirited mustang was off down the lane. Carley wondered with swelling heart. Was her coming such a wondrous surprise, so unexpected and big in generosity, something that would make Kilbourne as glad as it had seemed to make Flo? Carley thrilled to this assurance. Down the lane she flew. The red walls blurred, and the sweet wind whipped her face. At the trail she swerved the mustang, but did not check his gait. Under the great pines he sped, and round the bulging wall. At the rocky incline leading to the creek, she pulled the fiery animal to a trot. How low and clear the water! As Carley forded it, fresh cool drops splashed into her face. Again she spurred her mount, and again trees and walls rushed by. Up and down the yellow bits of trail, over the brown mats of pine needles, until there in the sunlight shone the little gray log cabin with the tall form standing in the door. One instant the canyon tilted on one end for Carley, and she was riding into the blue sky. Then some magic of soul sustained her, so that she saw clearly. Reaching the cabin, she reined in her mustang. "Hello, Glen! Look who's here!" she cried, not wholly failing of gaiety. He threw up his sombrero. "Whoopee!" he yelled. in stentorian voice that rolled across the canyon and bellowed in hollow echo, and then clapped from wall to wall. The unexpected Western yell, so strange from Glen, disconcerted Carley. Had he only answered her spirit of greeting? Had hers rung false? But he was coming to her. She had seen the bronze of his face turn to white. How gaunt and worn he looked. Older he appeared, with deeper lines and whiter hair. His jaw quivered. "Carley Burch, so it was you?" he queried hoarsely. "Glen, I reckon it was," she replied. "I bought your Deep Lake ranch site. I came back too late, but it is never too late for some things. I've come to wish you and Flo all the happiness in the world and to say we must be friends." The way he looked at her made her tremble. He strode up beside the mustang, and he was so tall that his shoulders came abreast of her. He placed a big warm hand on hers as it rested, ungloved, on the pommel of the saddle. "Have you seen Flo?" he asked. "I just left her. It was funny, the way she rushed me off after you. As if there weren't two." Was it Glen's eyes or the movement of his hand that checked her utterance? His gaze pierced her soul. His hand slid along her arm to her waist, around it. Her heart seemed to burst. "Kick your feet out of the stirrups," he ordered. Instinctively she obeyed. Then with a strong pull he hauled her half out of the saddle, pell-mell into his arms. Carley had no resistance. She sank limp in an agony of amaze. Was this a dream? Swift and hard his lips met hers, and again and again. "Oh, my God, Glen, are you mad?" she whispered, almost swooning. "Sure, I reckon I am," he replied huskily, and pulled her all the way out of the saddle. Carley would have fallen but for his support. She could not think. She was all instinct. Only the amaze, the sudden horror, drifted, faded as before fires of her heart. "Kiss me," he commanded. She would have kissed him if death were the penalty. How his face blurred in her dimmed sight. Was that a strange smile? Then he held her back from him. "Carley, you came to wish Flo and me happiness?" he asked. "Oh, yes, yes. Pity me, Glen. Let me go. I meant well. I should never have come." "Do you love me?" he went on, with passionate, shaking clasp. "God help me, I do, I do. And now it will kill me." "What did that damned fool Charley tell you?" The strange content of his query, the trenchant force of it, brought her upright, with sight suddenly cleared. Was this giant the tragic Glen who had strode to her from the cabin door? "Charley told me you and Flo were married," she whispered. "You didn't believe him," returned Glen. She could no longer speak. She could only see her lover, as if transfigured, lying dark against the looming wall. "That was one of Charley's queer jokes. I told you to beware of him. Flo is married, yes, and very happy. I'm unutterably happy, too. But I'm not married. Lee Stanton was the lucky bridegroom. Carley, the moment I saw you, I knew you had come back to me." End of chapter 12. Recording by Richard Kilmer, Rio Medina, Texas. End of The Call of the Canyon by Zane Grey.